Hey there, sleepyheads, soon to be sleepyheads. Tonight, we're going on a journey. Not across the world, not to a faraway land of dragons or treasure, but back in time, way back. I'm talking about the Middle Ages. Yes, medieval Europe. And we're diving straight into a topic that is surprisingly relatable. Sleep, but not just any sleep. We're talking about how children, yes, little medieval humans, survived freezing nights in drafty houses, straw mattresses, and a general lack of anything resembling modern comfort. If you've ever pulled a blanket over your head because the air conditioning is slightly too aggressive, you're about to feel better about your life, or worse, depending on your definition of cozy. Now, before we truly begin, let's set the mood, dim the lights, yes, really. Unless, of course, you live in a medieval cottage with a draft so aggressive it might carry away your cat. In which case, good luck with the draft. Maybe hug a family goat if you have one, and if you don't, well, just pretend you do. Imagination works wonders for warmth, right? Grab a blanket, a cup of something warm if you like, maybe a small snack, though no promises that medieval children had snacks as we know them. They probably had bread, sometimes a bit of cheese, maybe a leftover turnip. But the point is, settle in. Tonight, we are going to explore what it was like to be a child in a world where temperatures plummeted at night. Beds were lumpy, and the concept of personal space was basically non-existent. So, why should you care about how kids slept over 500 years ago? Well, first, it's fascinating. Second, it's a little humbling. And third, it's hilarious in the most itchy, bug-infested, goat-sharing kind of way. Think about it. Your biggest bedtime problem today might be that your phone battery is low or that your cat insists on sitting on your face. Medieval children had to contend with actual threats to warmth, comfort, and sometimes life itself. It was survival disguised as bedtime. Let's start small. Imagine a typical medieval evening. The sun has just set. Outside, it's cold, really cold. Not, oh, I should grab a sweater cold, but if you don't huddle near the fire or your sibling, you might wake up with toes frozen into a solid block of despair cold. Inside, the house is filled with the smells of smoke, cooking fires, and whatever livestock happened to be sharing the room with you. Yes, livestock. We'll get to that in a minute. But for now, imagine trying to curl up under a blanket made of straw while your little brother kicks you in the ribs and a chicken keeps pecking at your toes. Now. Pause for a second. Breathe. Let's compare that to today. Maybe you toss and turn while TikTok videos dance through your mind. Or you wake up at 2 a.m. to check Instagram stories, your phone buzzing in protest like a tiny modern alarm bell. Medieval children didn't have TikTok, but they had something even more intense. The knowledge that if they rolled over wrong, they could wake up cold, hungry, itchy, or even swatted by a goat. The stakes were high. Sleep wasn't just rest, it was survival. And somehow, these kids did it, night after night. And yes, they occasionally slept upright or in armor. But we'll get to that later. But let's not make it all doom and gloom. Life wasn't terrible, it was just medieval. And medieval life had a unique way of turning discomfort into routine. Children grew up expecting a certain level of chaos at bedtime. Straw mattresses full of bugs. Normal. Shared beds with siblings, cousins, or servants. Completely expected. Cold drafts sneaking through gaps in the walls. Part of the charm. By comparison, our modern complaints about pillow softness or the thermostat feel delightfully trivial. Tonight, We'll follow these little sleepers through all the ways they survived their harsh nights. We'll talk about the beds they shared, the animals that helped keep them warm and occasionally annoyed them, the nightcaps they wore like tiny woolen helmets, and the strange rituals that surrounded sleep. We'll peek into monasteries, inns, noble houses, and humble cottages to see just how much variety existed and how much ingenuity children and their families needed to simply stay alive through the night. We'll also laugh a little, because if you can't laugh at a medieval child curled up with a pig, a chicken, and a small cousin under one straw mattress, when can you laugh, really? Humor was as essential then as it is now, even if their version came in the form of dodging. Lice or quietly praying that the rat in the corner didn't wake up hungry. And through it all, we'll compare the past to today. How our modern luxury central heating, memory foam mattresses, thick blankets, and personal space seem miraculous when you think about what children endured. We'll also see that some habits weren't so different. Waking up in the night to check things, worrying about comfort, trying to get a decent stretch of sleep before morning. Humans have always wrestled with sleep, it seems, so cozy up. Take a deep breath. Maybe yawn once or twice, it helps with immersion. Trust me, you're about to step into a world where bedtime was an adventure, blankets were optional, and the stakes were surprisingly high. A world where children learned patience, resilience, and how to share body heat with friends, family, and occasionally farm animals. By the end of this journey, you'll have a new appreciation for your warm, quiet bed, your fluffy pillow, and maybe even your slightly noisy cat. You'll see that medieval children weren't just surviving, they were thriving, creatively adapting to a world we can hardly imagine. And if you ever find yourself complaining about your room being too cold, remember, a medieval child once slept through a winter night with 3 siblings, a goat and a chicken, all without modern heating, and they somehow made it through, so settle in. Dim the lights or at least squint at your screen like it's a flickering candle. Take a deep breath and let's travel back in time. Let's discover how medieval children slept without freezing. All right, now that we've settled in, let's talk about the first big challenge medieval children faced every single night. The cold, and not just a, oh it's chilly in my room kind of cold. I mean a deep, bone-chilling, draft-snaking kind of cold. The kind of cold that makes you question every life choice that led to you being here under a straw mattress, with a sibling kicking you in the ribs. You see, medieval Europe wasn't exactly famous for its cozy accommodations. Stone walls, great for castles and fortresses, not so great for keeping heat inside. Thatch roofs, excellent at leaking when it rained, letting icy wind curl around your neck like an unwelcome ghost. Windows, tiny holes of animal horn or oiled parchment that barely counted as protection. There was no double glazing, no central heating, no electric blankets. Basically, if it got cold outside, it got cold inside too, and it stayed cold all night long. Let's imagine a typical medieval child's bedroom, more accurately, family sleeping space. For most peasants, the entire family lived, cooked, ate, and slept in one single room. Yes, all in one. The smell of the hearth mixed with the smell of last night's meal, the smell of livestock, and, well, the general medieval human aroma. Not exactly lavender-scented dreams, but hey, it was functional. The room probably had a small fire going if the family could afford the wood, but even that wasn't enough to heat the space properly. In fact, the fire often served multiple purposes, cooking dinner, keeping the house warm, and, yes, keeping the children from freezing to death. And when I say children, I mean all of them, babies, toddlers, school-age kids. They were tucked in somewhere near the adults, or, if they were lucky, close to the hearth. The rule was simple. Closer to the fire equals warmer body. Of course, this also meant that if you got too close, you risked being roasted alive, or at least getting your toes singed. Medieval parents had to constantly juggle the delicate art of warmth without burning their own children alive. A true parental balancing act. For the wealthy, the situation was a little different. Castles and manor houses were big, drafty, and cold anyway. But at least they had large fireplaces, thick tapestries, and, sometimes, heavy curtains to trap heat. Children in noble families slept in actual bed's feather mattresses, warm blankets, and maybe even a nightcap to keep their heads cozy. But even then, winter nights were long, and cold seeped in through every crack. Nobody was truly immune. Now, you might wonder, why didn't they just pile on more blankets or wear more clothes? Well, they did. But it wasn't as simple as it sounds. Medieval textiles weren't like today's fleece or cotton. Blankets were coarse, heavy, sometimes scratchy, and often reused year after year. Clothes weren't always clean, and layers meant less mobility and more sweating. Yes, sweating then freezing again when the room cooled. It was a delicate balance between insulation and practicality, and children were expected to adapt. But let's not forget the real secret weapon against the cold: body heat. Lots and lots of body heat. This is why medieval children often slept in piles, literally human, warm bundles of sibling, parent, or cousin. And if you think your bed-hogging siblings are a problem today, imagine a 6-year-old wedged between your big brother, your mother, and the family goat. Yes, goats. In many peasant homes, livestock weren't just guests, they were roommates. Pigs, chickens, and sometimes even cows slept in the same room to share body heat. It sounds absurd today, but back then, a warm animal was a literal lifesaver. Of course, sharing a bed with a goat came with some downsides. Goats don't understand personal space. They kick, they bleat, they chew on your hair if you're not careful. But they are warm. And medieval children learned early that warmth often came with minor annoyances. Sacrifices were necessary. Survival required flexibility and, sometimes, a sense of humor. Now, let's talk about drafts. Houses weren't sealed. Chimneys, gaps. Between stones, wooden doors with cracks cold air snuck in from everywhere. If you weren't careful, it would whip across your straw mattress like a tiny, icy tornado. Children often wore nightcaps not for style, but to protect their heads. The head loses heat faster than any other part of the body, and in a freezing room, a nightcap was literally a helmet of warmth. Some caps were simple woolen hats, others were fancy embroidered affairs for noble kids, signaling status even in sleep, because, yes, even while shivering, a noble child had to look good. But medieval children didn't just endure cold, they also adapted cleverly. Some families used heated stones, which were warmed by the hearth and placed under blankets, to radiate heat. Others kept small fires near sleeping areas, or built little straw bunkers around the bed to trap warmth. Simple, creative solutions, primitive, central heating of sorts. And children learned to curl tightly, huddle for warmth, and conserve their body heat like little survival experts. Here's another funny thought. Imagine modern parents today, complaining about the thermostat being at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Now imagine medieval parents, tucking in their children next to a pig, muttering, "Well, at least your toes aren't frozen solid yet." Perspective changes everything, doesn't it? Comfort was optional, warmth was essential, and ingenuity was non-negotiable. Of course, not every night was survived without incident. Frostbite, colds, and fevers were common. Sleep was interrupted often by shivering, coughing, or the need to tend a fire. Children learned patience early. They learned to endure discomfort. And somehow, through all the cold, chaos, and occasional bleating, they slept. Somehow, they got through the night. Finally, it's important to note that cold wasn't just a physical challenge, it shaped routines, habits, and even culture. Sleeping close together reinforced family bonds. Sharing warmth became a social expectation, and the very idea of comfort, relative. Medieval children didn't know what luxurious sleep was. They knew warmth, safety, and survival. And in that context, they thrived. So, the next time you grumble about your blanket being too thin, or your heater not turning on fast enough, remember, a medieval child might have been curled up on a straw mattress with 3 siblings. A goat, a chicken, and a drafty stone wall whispering cold secrets through every crack. And yet, they slept. Not because it was comfortable, not because it was perfect, but because they had no other choice. And because humans are remarkably adaptable when it comes to survival. That, my friends, is the cold reality of medieval nights. And it's only the beginning. Tomorrow, or rather, in the next section we'll explore how medieval families arranged their beds, why everyone slept together, and why being squished up next to a sibling was literally a matter of life and warmth. Now that we've established how brutally cold medieval nights could be, it's time to talk about how children and families actually slept, or more accurately, how they huddled together in what we might politely call family piles. Yes, medieval sleeping arrangements were an art form in warmth, conservation, improvisation, and, sometimes, chaos. For most peasants, the entire family shared a single room. Imagine one small space, maybe no bigger than a modern living room, housing parents, children, and often grandparents, all under one roof. In some homes, servants or apprentices would be crammed in too. Privacy, forget it. The concept didn't exist. Instead, warmth and survival were communal responsibilities, and children were expected to adapt. The central strategy was simple. The closer you were to the body heat of another human, the warmer you stayed. Parents would often place the youngest children in the middle of the bed or pile, surrounded by older siblings and adults. If you were a toddler in a cold medieval cottage, you were basically a little marshmallow, snugged in by the bigger marshmallows around you. But it wasn't all smooth snuggling. These family piles could get competitive. Siblings jostled for prime positions near the fire or the parents. Everyone wanted warmth, but nobody wanted to get too close to the middle child who might kick in their sleep. And yet, somehow, a delicate balance was maintained night after night. Medieval children learned coordination and negotiation skills before they could even speak properly, rolling over without disturbing the entire pile. That was a skill. Animals also played a crucial role in these piles. Pigs, dogs, goats, and sometimes chickens were considered part of the sleeping ensemble. Why will animals generate body heat? A pig in the corner could raise the room temperature by a few degrees, which in January could mean the difference between frostbitten toes and slightly cold toes. And children, being smaller, benefited enormously from these furry or feathery space heaters. Of course, animals don't understand personal boundaries, which led to some awkward scenarios. A pig might snort in your ear at 2 a.m., a goat might nibble on a blanket edge, and a chicken could peck at your fingers if you moved too fast. Medieval children learned early that warmth often came with mild irritation. Beds themselves were creative solutions. For most peasant families, a bed was little more than a pallet of straw on the floor. Not particularly comfortable, and definitely not luxurious, but functional. Children often slept stacked in these piles, like soft, lumpy sardines. And if the family was slightly wealthier, the straw mattress might be raised onto a wooden frame. It didn't change the comfort level dramatically, but at least it kept you off the cold, damp floor and reduced the chances of waking up with bugs crawling on your face. Noble families, by contrast, had proper beds, feather mattresses, wooden frames, embroidered linens, and sometimes curtains to block drafts. Children slept in these beds with a little more personal space, but even then, comfort was relative. Stone castles were drafty, and fireplaces only warmed the room around them. A noble child could still wake up shivering despite being layered in blankets. Let's take a moment to imagine a medieval bedtime scenario. It's winter. A peasant child climbs onto the straw mattress, curls up next to their siblings, and tries to find a warm spot. The youngest sibling is kicking for warmth, maybe just because they're small and restless. A goat is wedged at the foot of the bed, snuffling. Mother adjusts a blanket. Father rolls over to check the fire. Somewhere, a chicken flutters and clucks. And you, the child, are wedged in the middle, trying to find the perfect sleeping position. It's cozy, yes, but also chaotic. Survival, after all, rarely comes with tranquility. One of the fascinating things about these sleeping arrangements is how medieval children developed resilience and adaptability. They learned to sleep in close proximity to other humans, animals, and constant movement. They learned to ignore the occasional bite, nudge, or snort. They learned patience, spatial awareness, and negotiation before they were 10. Modern children might have baby monitors, nightlights, and heated blankets. But medieval children had the real-life version of obstacle course sleep training. Interestingly, sharing a bed wasn't just about warmth. It was also a matter of safety and superstition. Many people believed that the night was dangerous, dark, mysterious, and full of spirits. Children were kept close to adults to protect them from demons, mischievous fairies, and other unseen threats. Being alone at night wasn't just uncomfortable, it was considered risky. A child sleeping in isolation might be seen as tempting fate or leaving their soul vulnerable. In that sense, family piles weren't just practical, they were protective. And yet, there was room for humor and creativity. Parents would sometimes make sure children were wrapped snugly in blankets or tucked into warm zones near the hearth. Siblings learned to strategically maneuver for warmth, negotiating positions like little generals. A tiny hand might reach over to snag a bit of extra blanket, or a child might roll slightly to claim the heat radiating from the parent's body. It was a nightly game, a mix of survival and subtle strategy. Of course, not all children were lucky enough to be in the middle of the warmth. The oldest siblings often took the edges of the pile. And sometimes, if a family was large, some children might sleep on the floor or near the doorway, closer to the draft but further from squabbles. Those kids learned to make the best of it, curling tightly, using animals for heat, or tucking under extra layers of clothing. Medieval children were masters of compromise, often without realizing it. And while the idea of sharing a bed with family, siblings, and animals might sound uncomfortable, to us, it created bonds and routines. Children learned early to adapt to shared spaces, to accept discomfort, and to find warmth wherever possible. Modern parenting emphasizes independence and personal space, but medieval children were social sleepers. Comfort was secondary to survival. Warmth and community. Humor played its part as well. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to find your little cousin's elbow pressing against your ribs, the family dog snoring in your face, or the goat licking the blanket edge. Medieval children developed a sense of humor about nighttime chaos, learning that warmth often came with unexpected and, sometimes ridiculous, companions. In short, medieval sleeping arrangements were ingenious, communal, and chaotic, a system designed for survival. Family piles were more than beds. They were body heat networks, protection systems, and early training in patience and cooperation. Children learned to share, adapt, and endure in ways that modern children, with their heated blankets and central heating, could hardly imagine. So, now that we've explored the chaos of family piles, let's zoom in on what those piles were actually made of: the humble, lumpy, sometimes horrifying straw mattress. If you've ever flopped onto a memory foam mattress and thought, "Oh, heaven," you're about to realize how spoiled you are. Medieval children had to navigate a world where mattresses were more like piles of flattened hay, sometimes in a sack, sometimes just spread on the floor, occasionally damp and always itchy. Peasant beds were as simple as they sound. Straw was cheap, plentiful, and most importantly, insulating. But it came with a cost. Bugs loved straw. Lice, fleas, and tiny mysterious critters considered medieval bedding a 5-star hotel. So, while a child might be warm, they were also constantly aware of something crawling somewhere. Scratching and twitching became part of the nighttime routine. Sleeping through the night, that was considered an achievement. The layout was simple: a straw mattress or pallet on the floor, blankets, if the family could afford them, and, of course, layers of clothing. Children often slept fully clothed not for style, but practicality. Clothes were warm, reusable, and a small defense against drafts. Pajamas as we know them didn't exist, and frankly, children didn't need them. Survival was incentive enough to keep still, bundled up, and warm. For slightly wealthier peasants, the straw pallet might be elevated on a wooden frame, creating a tiny platform that kept the bed off the cold, damp floor. Still lumpy, still itchy, still full of surprises, but slightly more comfortable, and comfort, in medieval terms, was relative. Even nobles with feather beds faced cold, drafts, and the occasional pest. The main difference: nobles had blankets, sheets, and sometimes curtains to trap heat, while peasants made do with whatever scraps of fabric or extra straw they could find. Let's talk about the actual experience of sleeping on straw. First, it's lumpy, really lumpy. Picture dozens of short, stiff straws packed together, some sticking out at awkward angles, forming tiny hills and valleys. A child curling up on that mattress had to navigate the terrain, sometimes shifting their body multiple times before finding a vaguely comfortable spot. If you ever tried sleeping on a camping mattress with lumps underneath, you'll have a small idea, but straw was like that, multiplied, and it didn't compress evenly. One side might be soft and cozy, the other sharp enough to poke a finger through your sock. Then there were the bugs. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs didn't just nibble, they were practically roommates. Children learned to ignore the occasional bite, shift when needed, and pray for mercy from the tiny invaders. Nobles sometimes hired servants specifically for nitpicking. A medieval job that involved meticulously removing lice from the family's hair and bedding. Imagine a child's horror knowing that the comfort of a proper night's sleep depended on another person's careful combing skills. Yet, despite the discomfort, straw mattresses had advantages. Straw is insulating, surprisingly warm if layered properly, and breathable. Unlike modern synthetic mattresses that trap moisture, straw could absorb a little dampness and prevent the bed from becoming freezing cold. And if you were clever, you could pile extra straw around your body like a tiny fortress against drafts. Survival creativity was alive and well now. Let's compare peasants' beds to noble children's beds. Nobles slept on wooden frames with feather mattresses, sometimes with curtains to keep drafts out. They had linens, blankets, and maybe even woolen nightcaps to keep their heads warm. Still, castles were drafty. Fireplaces were rarely enough to heat a huge room, and winter nights were long. Even noble children needed to bundle up and huddle for warmth, though they did so with slightly more style and significantly fewer bugs. Straw mattresses also shaped children's sleeping habits. Because the beds were lumpy and shared, children often learned to sleep lightly, shifting when someone kicked or when an animal moved. Unlike today, where a deep sleep is ideal, medieval children adapted to fragmented, alert sleep, ready to react if the fire went out or the goat decided it wanted a new spot on the bed. And this is where humor comes in. Imagine a 6-year-old trying to get comfortable while sharing a lumpy straw mattress with siblings, a cat and a pig. One sibling kicks, the pig nudges, the cat curls on your stomach, and the room smells faintly of yesterday's soup. You shift, you scratch, you curl tighter. Somehow, amidst all this, you manage to fall asleep, and the next morning you wake up stiff, itchy, maybe with a bruise or two, but alive. Victory. Some families developed clever adaptations. They might line the straw with cloth, sprinkle herbs to deter pests, or build mini walls of straw around their sleeping area to block drafts. A medieval child's bed was not just a place to lie down, it was a survival station, a microcosm of warmth, defense, and ingenuity. And let's be honest, it probably made them appreciate modern mattresses more than we ever do. Children in monasteries or noble households had it slightly different. Monastic children choir boys or wards slept on wooden planks, sometimes with a thin straw layer. Nobles' children had better mattresses, but were still subject to drafty rooms and cold nights. The lesson, warmth, was never guaranteed, no matter your social standing. Adaptation and cleverness mattered more than luxury. Now, let's add one more factor: size and sharing space. Straw pallets were often just big enough for 2 or 3 people. Large families had to stack people, sometimes with children sleeping in shifts or using the same pallet in rotation. It was crowded, warm, chaotic, and highly effective for survival. You learned early how to navigate your siblings without starting a bed battle, a skill that might sound trivial, but it literally meant staying warm enough to survive the night. Finally, let's appreciate the humor in all this. Today, we complain about lumpy mattresses, creaky bed frames, or sleeping on the wrong side of the bed. Medieval children didn't have these luxuries. They had lumpy straw, drafty floors, pests, and unpredictable animal roommates. And yet, they managed, every night, year after year. It's a testament to human resilience and adaptability. So, the next time you complain about your bed being too soft, too hard, or your blanket too thin, remember this. Somewhere in medieval Europe, a child was balancing themselves on a lumpy straw pallet, wedged between siblings and a goat, shivering just enough to stay awake, and still somehow surviving. That, my friends, is real endurance. And that brings us naturally to the next part of our journey. Clothing as blankets. How children layered themselves in day clothes, nightcaps, and whatever scraps of warmth they could find to stay cozy. Because, in the Middle Ages, fashion and survival often went hand in hand, even at bedtime. Clothes as pajamas, all right. Now that we've seen the chaos of family piles and the lumpy horror of straw mattresses, let's talk about what medieval children wore to sleep. Spoiler alert, it wasn't pajamas. In fact, the concept of sleepwear, as we know it today, didn't exist. For medieval kids, nighttime clothing was basically a survival strategy. Most children slept in the same clothes they wore during the day. That's right, no fluffy pajamas, no onesies, no cartoon-themed footy suits. Your tunic, your leggings, your woolen shirt, they all doubled as bedtime wear. And why not? Clothes kept you warm, were practical, and didn't require extra laundry, which was labor-intensive and expensive. Medieval parents were all about efficiency. Why have a separate set of clothes for bed when you can just wear what you already have, no questions asked? Imagine being a medieval child in the winter. You've spent the day running errands, helping in the kitchen, fetching water, or tending animals. You're cold, tired, and maybe a little hungry. Then it's bedtime, and your parents don't hand you a cozy set of pajamas. They hand you your day tunic and woolen layers, possibly damp from a little outdoor adventure. You crawl into the straw mattress or family pile, fully clothed, and hope that your body heat and proximity to siblings or parents will keep you warm. And let's talk about nightcaps. These weren't fashion statements. Oh no, a nightcap in medieval Europe was basically a helmet for warmth. Your head loses heat faster than any other part of your body, and in a drafty cottage or stone castle, that could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. Nightcaps were made from wool, linen, or whatever scraps of fabric the family could spare. Some were long and pointed, looking like something a wizard might wear if he moonlighted as a chimney sweep. For children, a nightcap was not optionally, was essential. Noble children had slightly more luxurious sleepwear. They might have soft woolen tunics, embroidered linens, and layered clothing designed to trap heat without restricting movement. But even then, they weren't completely insulated. Castles were drafty, fires only warmed the immediate area, and long winter nights still demanded bundling and clever layering. So whether peasant or noble, medieval children learned the art of strategic layering early on. Now, here's where humor comes in. Imagine being a child, fully clothed, trying to get comfortable on a lumpy straw mattress. Your tunic is itchy. Your woolen socks are too tight. Your nightcap keeps sliding over your eyes. And your sibling is elbowing you in the ribs for prime warmth territory. You shift, you twist, you curl up, and somehow you fall asleep amidst chaos. If you think toddlers today are fussy about bedtime clothes, medieval kids were the original warriors of sleep. The layers of clothing also had other benefits. They protected against bugs, reduced the chill from drafts, and provided a little cushion on the straw mattress. Essentially, your tunic, your leggings, your socks, and your nightcap were all multi-purpose survival tools. And children adapted quickly, learning which layers kept them warmest and how to arrange themselves in the family pile for maximum comfort. Another interesting aspect: medieval clothing for sleep often reflected social status. Wealthier children might have soft dyed fabrics and fine wool, while peasants wore coarse, homespun material. This wasn't just about luxury, it affected warmth. Fine wool retained heat better than rough straw fibers, and layered tunics could be surprisingly effective. But even the poorest children found ways to survive, whether by cuddling closer to siblings or animals, or layering whatever they could scavenge. Sleeping fully clothed also had health and hygiene benefits. Baths were rare, laundry was limited, and soap was expensive or harsh. Wearing the same clothes to bed reduced the number of times a child needed to change, keeping them warmer and avoiding unnecessary exposure to cold while changing layers. It might sound uncomfortable to us, but medieval children considered it normal. And let's be honest, after a long day of work, who wants to change clothes before bed anyway? Now, let's add another twist: nobility versus commoners in nighttime attire. Noble children sometimes had robes or long nightshirts, layered with silk or wool, and might even have small blankets for extra warmth. Peasant children, however, relied on the ingenuity of layering everyday clothes and staying close to body heat sources. Both groups, however, faced the same underlying challenge: cold, long nights that demanded adaptability. Humor helps us imagine this. Picture a medieval child, fully dressed in an itchy tunic, struggling to find comfort on a straw mattress. Sibling kicks them. A pig nudges their feet. The nightcap slides over their eyes. And yet they sleep, somehow. And in the morning they wake up stiff, itchy, possibly hungry, but ready to face another day. Modern children complaining about polyester pajamas just don't understand the true art of bedtime survival. So, clothes were essential, not just for warmth, but for practicality, protection, and survival. Nightcaps, layered tunics, socks, and whatever scraps of fabric were available allowed children to endure long, cold nights. And while we might find it funny, medieval children considered it completely normal. They learned early to adapt, tolerate discomfort, and use creativity to stay warm. Lessons that were literally matters of life and death. Finally, wearing clothes to bed also shaped medieval routines and behaviors. Children learned to sleep lightly, shift carefully, and adjust their positions without disturbing others. They became aware of how their body heat interacted with the pile, the animals, and the drafts. Sleep was not just rest. It was an active process, a nightly survival challenge, and medieval children rose to it, night after night, fully clothed, fully aware, and surprisingly resilient. And with that, we've covered the role of clothes in medieval sleep. Next, we'll explore the role of animals in the family pile. How dogs, pigs, goats, and even chickens became critical to keeping children warm, and how these animal roommates shaped the experience of bedtime in the Middle Ages. Spoiler, it's hilarious, chaotic, and sometimes slightly terrifying. If you think sharing a bed with siblings is challenging, imagine sharing a bed with a goat, a pig, and maybe even a chicken. Welcome to the world of medieval children's sleep. In the days before central heating, insulated walls, and cozy duvets, animals weren't just farm creatures, they were essential heat sources. And for medieval children, sharing a bed with animals was perfectly normal. Let's set the scene. It's a bitter winter night. The family huddles on a straw mattress, fully clothed, layered in whatever scraps of fabric they can find. The fire crackles weakly in the hearth, sending limited warmth into the room. And then there's the real magic. The animals. Dogs curl up at your feet, providing body heat and occasionally nudging you awake with a sloppy nose. Pigs, surprisingly effective at radiating warmth, occupy one corner of the bed, snuffling softly. Goats, ever the troublemakers, sometimes wedge themselves between siblings, making every night a delicate negotiation of warmth and personal space. And yes, chickens sometimes roosted on top of the straw, their tiny bodies adding heat while pecking at loose threads or toes that got too close. Why animals? Well, humans are warm-blooded, but children are small and lose heat quickly. In a freezing room, animal body heat was a literal lifesaver. The larger the animal, the more heat it produced. A pig could keep the room a few degrees warmer. A dog could shield little feet. And even a chicken or cat added tiny but meaningful warmth. Medieval parents knew this instinctively. Heat was survival, and animals were part of the family pile. Strategy, of course. Sharing your bed with animals wasn't without its downsides. Animals don't understand personal boundaries, bedtime routines, or the concept of not snoring. Imagine a goat deciding that your pillow is the perfect scratching post, or a pig rolling over and nudging your sibling into your lap. Medieval children became experts in patience and balance, learning to tolerate mild chaos in exchange for warmth. Animals also introduced hygiene challenges. Bedding was rarely washed, straw harbored bugs, and animals often carried fleas, lice, or other tiny pests. But survival trumped comfort. Children learned early that warmth and life came with minor annoyances, and they adapted, scratching, shifting, and curling tighter were nightly rituals, part of the dance of medieval sleep. Humor, of course, was always present. Picture a medieval child trying to fall asleep while a chicken pecks at their nightcap, a goat licks their toes, and the family dog snores loudly against their side. You might think bedtime would be impossible, but these children learned to find comfort in chaos. They mastered the art of sleeping lightly, adjusting their position to maximize warmth without disturbing the entire pile. Animals also played a psychological role. Sleeping with animals provided companionship, protection, and reassurance. Dark, drafty rooms were scary, especially at night when shadows loomed and strange noises echoed. Having a warm, breathing, snoring animal nearby made the night less lonely and slightly less terrifying. In a way, medieval children's animal bedmates were early versions of nightlights, comforting, tangible, and occasionally noisy. Interestingly, different animals had different roles. Dogs were reliable and loyal, often lying still to conserve warmth. Pigs were larger, less predictable, but excellent radiators. Goats were mischievous, often moving around and nudging humans, reminding them that warmth came at the price of vigilance. Chickens were tiny heat sources, adding just enough body warmth while creating mild chaos. Medieval children learned the personalities of their animal bedmates and adjusted accordingly. A skill that seems bizarre today, but was essential then. Some families even rotated animals depending on the season, the temperature, or availability. A particularly cold night might see every available warm body, animal or human, crammed onto the bed. Warmth was the priority. Order and comfort were secondary. Children became adept at negotiating positions, finding the optimal spot between a sibling and a pig, while avoiding being squashed by an enthusiastic goat. we can't ignore the humor and absurdity of this arrangement. Modern bedtime complaints: too hot, too cold, blankets twisted pale in comparison. A medieval child had to contend with animals that had minds of their own, moving unpredictably, sometimes stealing warmth, sometimes adding it. And yet, these children fell asleep, night after night. Somehow, amidst the snoring, bleating, and pecking, they managed to survive and even thrive. Animals weren't only present in peasant homes. Noble children sometimes had lapdogs, cats, or even exotic pets that slept with them. These pets weren't strictly for warmth. They were status symbols, but they also added comfort, even in castles with feather mattresses and thick blankets. Animals provided companionship, reassurance, and an extra layer of warmth. And, unlike in peasant homes, these animals were generally cleaner, better fed, and less likely to bite your toes. The medieval approach to animals as bedmates also reinforced community and responsibility. Children learned to care for their sleeping. Companions adjust their positions for shared warmth and respect the needs of others in the pile, human or animal. Sleeping arrangements became a nightly lesson in empathy, negotiation, and adaptation, all taught in the most chaotic and cozy classroom imaginable. By now, it should be clear, medieval children didn't just sleep, they engineered survival. Family piles, layered clothing, and animal companions were part of a sophisticated system designed to keep them warm, safe, and ready for the challenges of the next day. Modern comforts, like central heating, heated blankets, and memory foam mattresses, make us forget how much strategy, flexibility, and humor went into simply getting through the night in the Middle Ages. And with that, we've seen how medieval children used animals as literal and metaphorical warm blankets. Up next, we'll explore the fears of the night, the stories, spirits, and superstitions that shaped how children approached bedtime. Because warmth wasn't the only concern. Darkness itself carried its own challenges. Fear of the night. So far, we've covered the cold, the lumpy straw mattresses, the layers of clothing, and the furry, feathery bedmates that kept medieval children warm. But warmth wasn't the only challenge these kids faced at night. The dark itself was a whole other beast. And I'm not talking about the occasional bump in the night or a shadow on the wall. Medieval darkness was filled with mystery, superstition, and fear. To understand this, imagine a medieval home at night. There's no electric light, no glow from your phone or tablet, not even a candle flickering on every corner. If you were lucky, a small fire burned in the hearth, sending flickers of light across the room. But shadows still loomed large, stretching and shifting as the fire sputtered. Every crack, every draft, every rustle of straw could spark the imagination of a child. And medieval children had very active imaginations, fueled by stories, warnings, and superstition. Parents and grandparents didn't just worry about frostbite, they worried about demons, spirits, and mischievous fairies. Stories of evil creatures lurking in the dark were told to children not only to explain the unexplained, but also to encourage obedience. Go to bed now, or the night fairy will steal your toes. Might not be an exact historical quote, but it captures the essence. Fear was educational, and in a way, it was a survival tool. Kids who respected the darkness were more likely to stay close to warmth and safety. Sleeping alone, almost unheard of. Children were tucked in with siblings, parents, or animals, partly for warmth, but also for protection against the unknown. The night was considered dangerous. Shadows could hide a thief, a wild animal, or were spirits and supernatural forces that could snatch your soul, or at least give you nightmares. Sleeping alone was not just uncomfortable, it was a spiritual hazard. Monks and clergy reinforced these ideas. Religious teachings emphasized the importance of vigilance at night. Nighttime was the realm of sin, temptation, and the devil's tricks. Even children absorbed these lessons through prayers, stories, and constant supervision. The line between practical safety and spiritual fear was thin, and children learned early to respect both. Humor sneaks in here, because we know how imaginative children can be. Picture a little medieval child, fully clothed, on a lumpy straw mattress, sharing a pile with a sibling, a pig, and a goat. The room is dark, the shadows flicker across the walls. The animals shift around and, suddenly, every creak, groan, or rustle is a potential ghost or demon. Kids became experts at detecting tiny noises, judging whether a shadow was a friend or a foe, and staying as still as possible to avoid attracting attention. Stories of the supernatural were everywhere. Children were warned about spirits, witches, and wandering souls. Ghosts weren't just tales, they were part of the landscape, lurking in forests, fields, and even in cottages. A sudden gust of wind through a window, probably a mischievous spirit. A creaking floorboard, definitely a ghost. Medieval children developed an acute awareness of their surroundings and a healthy respect for the night. Sleep itself was affected. Children learn to sleep lightly, wake easily, and adjust quickly. A sudden sound might signal danger, a shadow might need investigating, and moving too abruptly could wake everyone in the family pile. It was a delicate balance between rest and vigilance. Modern children might have night lights or white noise machines. Medieval children had intense sensory awareness and a bit of anxiety, which surprisingly helped them survive. Of course, not all fears were supernatural. Some were practical. Livestock sometimes wandered, rats scurried, and small fires could flare unexpectedly. But superstition added layers to these practical fears. A goat stepping on your toes could be just a goator, a harbinger of doom, sent to teach humility and patience. Children learned to interpret the night, balancing imagination and experience, understanding when to panic and when to simply shift slightly in the pile. Religious routines also shaped bedtime. Children were encouraged to pray before sleep, not just for comfort but for protection. Prayers, chants, and rituals created structure, offering a sense of control in an otherwise unpredictable environment. A little medieval child might end the day reciting prayers while snuggling next to a sibling, a cat, and a pig, imagining angels guarding them from spirits and demons. It was comforting in a slightly terrifying way. Fear of the night also reinforced social cohesion. Children who slept together, parents who monitored bedtime, and families who shared warmth and vigilance created a network of mutual protection. The night might be scary, but it was safer together than alone. And medieval children learned early that sleep was as much a social activity as it was a biological need. Despite all this, humor and adaptability remained. Kids laughed about the absurdities, learned to navigate animals, siblings, and darkness, and eventually fell asleep. The chaos, the cold, and the fear became part of the rhythm of life. And through it all, medieval children developed resilience, alertness, and creativity skills that helped them survive not just the night, but the harsh world they woke up to each morning. In short, the night wasn't just a time to sleep, it was a lesson in patience, awareness, and courage. Medieval children learned to navigate the cold, share warmth, endure lumpy beds, deal with animals, and respect the darkness. Fear was ever present, but so was ingenuity, humor, and family support. And in that combination, children not only survived, they thrived. Segmented sleep and night watches so far. We've explored cold rooms, lumpy straw mattresses, bundled up clothing, animal bedmates, and even the creeping fear of the night. But if you think a medieval child's sleep was a single stretch of unconscious bliss, think again. Children and adults back then often practiced segmented sleep, a nightly routine that sounds bizarre to modern ears. Segmented sleep meant splitting the night into two distinct periods, the first sleep and the second sleep. After the first period of slumber, people would wake for 1, 2, 3 hours in the middle of the night before returning to bed for a second sleep. Today, we'd probably call this sleep interrupted, but in medieval Europe, it was the norm. Families didn't panic about waking at 2 a.m. They just accepted it as a natural rhythm. Picture a child lying on a straw mattress, fully clothed, snuggled against siblings and perhaps a pig, drifting off into the first sleep. The room is still, shadows flicker, and animals are slowly settling. After a few hours, the child wakes not because of discomfort or fear, necessarily, but because the body's circadian rhythm naturally calls for a pause. Today, you might grab your phone and doom scroll Instagram. Back then, children might pray, tend a small fire, or even visit the privy if they were lucky enough to have one indoors. These middle-of-the-night hours weren't wasted. Families used them for quiet activities like prayer, reflection, or household chores. Children might whisper stories, fetch water, or check on livestock. Waking in the middle of the night was simply part of life, not a disruption. Parents and siblings expected it, and children adapted. Think of it as a mini adventure between two sleep sessions. Pause in the night for survival, reflection, or a secret snack if one could be found. Humor played its part here, too. Imagine a 6-year-old sneaking quietly out of bed, trying not to wake a snoring sibling, tiptoeing past the family goat, only to stub their toe on a stray piece of firewood. Medieval children learned caution, stealth, and balance early in life, all because of segmented sleep. If you've ever woken up at 3 a.m. with a cold foot and thought, "Why me?" just be grateful it wasn't on a straw mattress surrounded by animals. Segmented sleep also had practical benefits. Fires needed tending, animals needed checking, and houses required maintenance. Waking in the middle of the night was not laziness, it was survival. Children were often participants in these activities, learning responsibility and contributing to the household from a young age. The night wasn't idle, it was active. Interestingly, this pattern shaped dreams and beliefs. The period between first and second sleep was thought to be spiritually significant. People believed that dreams during this wakeful period were more meaningful, prophetic, or influenced by divine forces. Children were taught to observe their dreams, recount them to parents, and sometimes pray for interpretation. Sleep wasn't just rest. It was a blend of biological necessity and cultural practice. From a modern perspective, segmented sleep might sound inefficient. Why not just sleep straight through? But medieval children adapted seamlessly. The night became a natural rhythm of activity and rest, a combination of sleep, vigilance, and reflection. And humorously, this rhythm often forced family piles to shift positions in the middle of the night. Children moved closer to the fire, adjusted themselves against siblings, or shifted to make room for an animal, deciding that 2 a.m. was the perfect time to snuggle. Some families even incorporated night watches, particularly in colder regions. Older children might be tasked with keeping a fire burning or checking on animals. In castles, children might participate in quiet duties, such as watching over supplies or assisting servants. These tasks weren't burdens, they were considered normal part of teaching responsibility and survival skills. And while it might seem harsh, children often enjoyed being entrusted with these tasks. Proud of their contributions to the household, segmented sleep also created shared experiences across generations. Adults and children woke together, whispered stories, or shared observations. It was a communal rhythm, a nightly tradition connecting everyone in the household. Modern nuclear families might find this strange. How could you sleep properly with interruptions? But for medieval children, this pattern was so ingrained it didn't feel disruptive. It was simply the way life was organized. The middle of a night. Wakefulness also gave children a unique perspective on the world. The stillness, the flickering firelight, the sounds of animals and siblings contributed to a heightened awareness. Night wasn't just dark and scary, it was magical, reflective, and alive. Children learned to navigate it, adapt, and even find humor in small moments of chaos, like a goat deciding that the child's head was a warm resting spot. Of course, there were challenges. A restless sibling, a snoring dog, or a cold draft could make returning to sleep tricky. Children learned techniques to cope, curling tighter, whispering softly to siblings, or strategically positioning themselves near the warmest heat source. These strategies weren't taught, they were learned through trial and error, refined over years. Medieval children became experts in light, adaptive sleep, skills that modern humans with cushioned mattresses rarely need to master. Segmented sleep also influenced daily routines. Children woke more alert, accustomed to small bursts of activity during the night. This might explain historical accounts of children who seemed unusually responsible or observant. They had practiced vigilance, adaptability, and problem-solving from a very young age, or during what we might consider the middle of the night. Humor again sneaks in. Imagine a child trying to sneak back under the straw mattress after a midnight wakefulness, only to find the family dog sprawled across their bed or a sibling hogging the prime spot near the fire. Medieval children learned flexibility, patience, and negotiation in ways modern kids might never experience. Every night was a miniature survival exercise, blending rest, responsibility, and social coordination. In short, segmented sleep and night watches weren't just quirky customs, they were essential parts of medieval life. Children learned resilience, adaptability, and teamwork, all while navigating the cold, the darkness, and a host of animals and siblings. Modern straight-through sleep might be more convenient, but medieval children thrived in the biological and cultural rhythm of interrupted nights, proving once again that humans can adapt to almost any challenge. Even a 2-part night on a lumpy straw mattress. Next, we'll dive into monastic influence on children's sleep, exploring how orphaned or choir boy children in monasteries endured regimented routines, wooden planks, and strict schedules that would make modern sleep enthusiasts weep. Spoiler, it's disciplined, fascinating, and occasionally terrifying. Monastic influence on children's sleep now. Let's step away from the chaos of family piles, animals, and lumpy straw mattresses and peek into the world of monasteries. Here, Sleep was no longer just a matter of warmth and survival, it became a discipline, a routine, and sometimes a test of endurance. Choir boys, orphans, and noble wards living in monasteries were subject to schedules that would make even the most devoted modern sleep enthusiasts shudder. Imagine a room full of children lying on hard wooden planks, each with a thin layer of straw or cloth, no fluff, no padding, and definitely no cuddling with siblings or pigs. Comfort was a luxury, and discipline was king. The goal wasn't just rest. It was to train the mind and body according to monastic principles. Children were taught to sleep lightly, wake punctually, and respond to the rhythm of the monastery. The daily routine was strict. Nighttime prayers, known as Compline, marked the beginning of sleep. Children were expected to participate, kneeling or standing as required, before finally returning to their wooden beds. The first sleep might be brief, because the monastic schedule often demanded vigorous early rising for morning prayers. Interruptions were common, whether due to midnight, vigils, the ringing of bells, or a supervising monk checking the dormitory. There was no hitting the snooze button here. Discipline extended to the behavior during sleep. Snoring, fidgeting, or talking could earn a reprimand or worse. Children learned to control their bodies even while resting, an unusual skill for anyone, let alone a child. The monastery environment taught resilience, obedience, and a remarkable tolerance for discomfort. They learned that sleep was both a necessity and a test of self-control. Even cold was part of the monastic experience. Many dormitories were drafty stone rooms, heated only minimally. Children slept in layered tunics and nightcaps, similar to peasant children, but with less chaos from animals or siblings. Instead, their battles were against discomfort, fatigue, and the monotony of discipline. Adaptation was key. Those who could endure these conditions thrived. Those who struggled were guided, or sometimes chastised, into learning the rhythm of the monastic night. Humor, though subtle, still existed. Imagine a choir boy curled on a plank, trying to stay awake for the midnight vigil while suppressing a sneeze in the drafty stone dormitory, or a child silently shivering while trying not to disturb a neighbor with a twitchy leg. Monastic life was serious, yes, but children found ways to endure, sometimes in creative, quietly mischievous ways. Survival, after all, often required a blend of obedience and ingenuity. Monasteries also reinforced structured sleep patterns. Segmented sleep, as we discussed earlier, was common here too, but it was tied to spiritual practice. Waking between first and second sleep wasn't just natural, it was purposeful. Children might meditate, pray, or perform quiet chores. Sleep was framed as part of a larger rhythm of devotion and responsibility, teaching children early that life required balance between rest, duty, and alertness. Interestingly, monastic life also exposed children to cultural knowledge about sleep and dreams. Monks believed that dreams could carry messages from God or warnings of moral transgressions. Children were encouraged to observe and interpret their dreams, blending practical survival skills with spiritual awareness. Sleep became both a physical necessity and a moral exerciser, far cry from the casual dozing on a living room couch that we enjoy today. And yet, despite all the discipline, cold planks, and rigorous schedules, children survived and often thrived. Monastic training produced alert, resilient, and disciplined youth, able to wake easily, endure discomfort, and function in highly structured environments. It was a kind of boot camp for the body and mind, disguised as bedtime. Finally, influence reminds us that sleep in the Middle Ages wasn't universal. It varied by social context. Family homes emphasized warmth, animals, and flexibility. Monasteries emphasized discipline, structure, and moral education. Both environments, however, shared a central principle. Sleep was vital, but survival, adaptability, and resilience mattered more in the next section. We'll explore dreams and nightmares, diving into the fascinating ways medieval children and adults interpreted the mysterious world of the unconscious. Because if cold, drafts, and goats weren't enough, the mind itself could conjure fears far stranger than anything in the room. So, dreams and nightmares, we've covered cold rooms, lumpy straw, piles of siblings and animals, monastic discipline, and even the segmented sleep of medieval children. But sleep wasn't just about staying warm or surviving the night. It was also a portal to a strange, mysterious, and sometimes terrifying world. Dreams. Medieval people took dreams seriously, especially children. Dreams weren't just random images or brain clutter. They could be omens, divine messages, or warnings from evil spirit. A nightmare wasn't merely unpleasant. It could be a sign that a child or their family needed to act, pray, or make amends. Parents often asked children to recount their dreams in the morning, trying to interpret hidden meanings. And of course, this encouraged children to remember every bizarre detail, from the talking goat in the dream to the magical fire that never went out. Let's be honest, modern children complain about nightmares of monsters under the bed. Medieval children had nightmares of demons, witches, and specters hovering in the dark, watching and judging their behavior. A dream of spilling milk, bad luck, dream of falling from a high place, a warning of carelessness. Even seemingly mundane dreams were analyzed, interpreted, and sometimes feared. Humor was woven into this world of dreams. Children might confess to stealing bread in a dream, or argue with a spectral teacher about homework in a nightmare. Parents, taking it seriously, would nod sagely, offer advice, or sprinkle a little holy water on the child's bedding. Modern bedtime problems, like a nightmare about a failed test or a scary cartoon, look tame in comparison. Medieval dreams were intense, morally charged, and sometimes downright ridiculous in retrospect. Interestingly, dreams were also influenced by segmented sleep. Waking between the first and second sleep often produced the most vivid and memorable dreams. Scholars of the time believed that middle-of-the-night dreams carried special significance, possibly offering insights from God or forewarning misfortune. Children were encouraged to share these dreams with elders, who would interpret them and advise on protective measures, prayers, or behavioral corrections. Sleep, it seemed, wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Some dreams were downright funny, at least in hindsight. Imagine a child dreaming of a goat reciting Latin prayers, a chicken giving moral advice, or a family dog acting as a knight defending the bedpile from imaginary invaders. While these dreams might have been entertaining, they were also taken seriously. The mind's nocturnal creativity blended the real, the supernatural, and the moral into a vivid tapestry that shaped the child's understanding of the world. Nightmares were also common. Children feared not only the cold and darkness, but also what their subconscious conjured. A bad dream might include a spectral figure demanding obedience, a monster hiding beneath a straw, or a loved one being threatened. These nocturnal adventures were terrifying, but also teaching tools. Children learned to face fear, build resilience, and understand that sleep required adaptability, not just physical endurance, but mental fortitude. Parents used rituals and prayers to help mitigate bad dreams. Simple bedtime prayers, sprinkling blessed water on the bedding, or telling protective stories were common. These acts didn't just comfort the child. They reinforced belief systems, discipline, and social norms. Sleep became a structured experience, combining warmth, protection, morality, and imagination. Dreams also intersected with superstition and folklore. Children were warned against evil forces, spirits, and witches that could interfere with sleep. Parents often used stories to shape behavior, emphasizing obedience and caution. A child might be told, "If you lie awake and your mind wanders to mischief, a demon might appear in your dream to teach you a lesson." This might sound extreme, but it was effective. Medieval children internalized these lessons, learning vigilance, morality, and creativity all while asleep. And yes, humor played a subtle role. Children often mixed fear and laughter, dreaming of absurd scenarios while taking lessons from them seriously. They might recount a terrifying dream involving a pig in a bishop's hat, only to be told, "That's a warning about greed." The mind's weird logic combined with real-world fears, producing vivid memories and stories that lasted long after the night ended. So, medieval children's sleep wasn't just rest. It was a complex mix of warmth, vigilance, morality, and imagination. They endured cold, shared beds with siblings and animals, observed spiritual rules, and navigated a landscape of meaningful dreams and frightening nightmares. Every night was an adventure in body, mind, and spirit, a true exercise in resilience. Next, we'll move into bedtime prayers and rituals, examining how medieval children prepared for sleep, not just physically, but spiritually, and how these nightly routines shaped their understanding of the world. Spoiler, it's equal parts fascinating, amusing, and surprisingly practical. Bedtime prayers and rituals. By now, we've seen how medieval children endured cold rooms, lumpy straw mattresses, chaotic bedmates, night fears, and even vivid dreams. But sleep wasn't just about warmth, comfort, or avoiding demons. It was also a spiritual practice. Bedtime in the Middle Ages often came with a set of rituals and prayers designed to protect the child, guide behavior, and prepare the mind and soul for the long night ahead. First, let's set the scene. The day is over, chores are done, the family pile is arranged, the animals are mostly settled, and the straw mattress has been navigated successfully. Now, the child or children turn their attention to prayers. These weren't casual mutterings. They could involve multiple steps, crossing oneself, reciting formal prayers, kneeling or bowing, and sometimes even chanting. Children learned these rituals early, often memorizing prayers in Latin, which added to the challenge. Imagine a 6-year-old, fully clothed, on a lumpy mattress, whispering words they don't fully understand while trying not to disturb a snoring sibling or a shifting pig. Modern children complaining about bedtime math homework. Not even close. Bedtime prayers served multiple purposes. They were spiritual, yes, asking for protection from evil spirits or blessings for the family. They were also practical. They helped calm the mind, signal the end of the day, and create a routine. A child who recited their prayers properly was more likely to feel safe, warm, and ready to sleep. It was a way to manage fear, much like we might use a nightlight or lullaby today. Some families incorporated physical rituals into bedtime. This could include sprinkling a little holy water on the mattress, placing a small amulet near the child, or even performing a minor cleansing ritual for the bed itself. These acts were believed to protect the child from harm, both physical and spiritual, and let's be honest, they probably added a touch of drama that made bedtime more memorable. You couldn't exactly fall asleep on a straw mattress without some sense of ceremony. Nighttime prayers were also intertwined with family bonding. Often older siblings or parents guided the younger children through the rituals, reciting prayers aloud or whispering instructions. This created a sense of structure, comfort, and safety, even in the drafty, cold rooms. Children learned that they were not alone. They were surrounded by family, animals, and a set of protective routines designed to get them through the night. For noble children, bedtime rituals could be even more elaborate. Feather beds, warm blankets, and embroidered nightcaps were paired with formal prayers and blessings. Sometimes a servant or tutor oversaw the process, ensuring that the child completed every step correctly. Mistakes could be gently corrected or, in some households, reprimanded. Discipline and devotion were tightly intertwined, teaching children obedience, mindfulness, and resilience. Interestingly, medieval bedtime rituals also served as moral education. Prayers weren't just about protection. They often emphasized virtues like honesty, kindness, and piety. A child was reminded to behave well, to avoid sin, and to reflect on their actions before sleep. In a way, bedtime became a nightly lesson in ethics and social expectation, subtly reinforcing societal norms while preparing the child for rest. Humor naturally found its way into these routines. Imagine a child struggling to remember a long Latin prayer while the goat nudges their feet, a sibling coughs, and the candle flickers dangerously close to the straw mattress. The scene is chaotic, uncomfortable, and yet deeply human. Medieval children learned to balance reverence with tolerance for chaos, finding comfort in routine while navigating a world full of unpredictability. The rituals also reflected the intersection of practicality and belief. Prayers and blessings were designed to ease fear, regulate behavior, and protect against both spiritual and physical dangers. Children weren't just reciting words, they were participating in a system that reinforced order, comfort, and survival. In a cold, drafty world where comfort was scarce, structure became a form of warmth. Another fascinating aspect. Some bedtime prayers included requests for protection from specific dangers. A child might ask for safety from thieves, fire, animals, or illness. Modern bedtime routines rarely include such detailed concerns. But medieval children grew up understanding that life was full of potential threats, some mundane, some supernatural. Preparing for sleep meant preparing for the world, in both practical and spiritual ways. Finally, bedtime rituals and prayers also helped children transition from wakefulness to sleep. After tending animals, reciting prayers, and performing minor rituals, the mind was calmer, the body more relaxed, and the room quieter. The chaos of the day chickens, siblings, goats, and chores momentarily suspended. Children could finally drift into the first segment of sleep, armed with warmth, structure, and reassurance. In short, bedtime in the Middle Ages wasn't just lying down on a straw mattress. It was a carefully orchestrated ritual, blending warmth, discipline, humor, morality, and spirituality. Children learned to navigate not just physical challenges, but mental and moral ones, preparing them to face both the night and the day to come. Next, we'll venture into inns and travel nights, exploring how medieval children slept away from home. From crowded rooms to strangers, the adventure of sleep didn't stop at the cottage door. It got louder, colder, and occasionally stranger. Inns and travel nights, approximately 1,200 words, now that we've explored how medieval children slept at home, in monasteries, and amid their family piles. Let's take a look at a whole different challenge: sleeping away from home, in inns and on the road. Travel nights were a whole new level of adventure, discomfort, and occasional chaos, and medieval children had to master them just as they did their straw mattresses. Imagine a medieval family setting out on a journey. Perhaps they're traveling for trade, visiting relatives, or fleeing danger. The day ends, and they must find a place to rest. Unlike modern hotels or Airbnb rentals, inns were basic, crowded, and noisy. Rooms were small, beds were few, and sleeping arrangements were shared with strangers. Privacy, don't even think about it. A typical inn might have one large room for the entire family, plus a few other travelers, merchants, or wandering pilgrims. The beds were often communal, meaning children might end up sharing a mattress with strangers. And by strangers, I mean people you had never met, who snored, shifted, and occasionally argued over blankets. Medieval children had to adapt quickly, learning tolerance, patience, and a surprising amount of social diplomacy. Animals sometimes accompanied travelers. Dogs, goats, or even chickens might be brought along for warmth or protection, and they often shared sleeping space with humans. So a child's bed on a travel night could include siblings, parents, strangers, and a small zoo of creatures all in one lumpy, shared mattress. Comfort was optional. Survival, mandatory. The noise factor in inns was significant. Snoring, arguing, footsteps, animals moving, doors creaking, and occasional drunken merchants created a symphony of sounds. A medieval child had to sleep lightly but adaptively, alert enough to avoid trouble, but skilled enough to catch some rest. Imagine modern parents trying to get their kids to sleep in a hostel filled with strangers and then add goats for effect. That's medieval life. Despite the chaos, children often found ways to maximize warmth and comfort. They might huddle closer to siblings, squeeze near an animal, or position themselves near the hearth if one existed. Layered clothing and nightcaps were still essential. In many ways, travel nights tested all the survival skills learned at home: navigating lumpy beds, enduring drafts, tolerating pests, and negotiating shared space. Travel nights also exposed children to different social dynamics. Sharing beds with strangers meant learning boundaries, respect, and cooperation. A clever child might strategically position themselves near the warmest human or animal, or near a friendly stranger who wouldn't kick them in their sleep. These skills, while amusing to think about now, were important lessons in adaptation and social intelligence. Food and hygiene were also limited. Medieval travelers often carried what they could, but inns didn't always provide extra blankets or bedding. Children had to be flexible, using whatever was available: a sack, a bundle of straw, or even extra clothing to stay warm. The experience reinforced resilience and the ability to make do with scarce resources. Some inns were more structured, particularly those catering to nobility or wealthier travelers. Noble children might have a small private bed, sometimes with blankets or a feather mattress, but even they couldn't escape the challenges of travel. Drafty stone walls, crowded rooms, and unfamiliar environments made sleep difficult. Comfort remained relative, no matter your status. Travel nights also offered moments of learning and adventure. Children observed how inns functioned, how strangers interacted, and how families manage resources on the road. They practiced patience, ingenuity, and courage skills that were as valuable as physical warmth. And humor was always present. Imagine a child trying to sleep while a stranger snores. A pig shifts, a dog curls on their feet, and the floor creaks with every step of another guest. Survival required tolerance and a sense of humor. Interestingly, inns also reinforced routines learned at home. Segmented sleep still applied. Children might wake in the middle of the night to tend animals, check on the fire, or simply readjust their position. Bedtime prayers could still be recited, even in a noisy, crowded room. Children carried habits, rituals, and survival strategies with them, adapting them to new environments. Despite the discomfort, travel nights offered social exposure and experience. Children learned to coexist with strangers, to navigate public spaces, and to manage limited resources all before breakfast. These experiences built resilience, empathy, and practical wisdom, qualities that would serve them throughout life, and humor, naturally, remained part of the experience. Picture a child wedged between a sibling and a merchant they've never met, trying to dodge a goat's hoof while listening to the cacophony of an inn. They might giggle silently, curse under their breath, or develop clever strategies for warmth. These travel nights, chaotic as they were, became memorable adventures, blending survival, adaptability, and unexpected comedy. Finally, it's important to note that travel nights sharpened all the skills children had learned at home: sleeping in piles, enduring cold, tolerating animals, respecting the darkness, navigating segmented sleep, and performing rituals. Every journey reinforced the lessons of childhood, demonstrating that survival, comfort, and adaptability were always linked. Next, we'll explore the rich child's bedtime, contrasting the comfort and luxury of noble families with the chaos and creativity of peasant life. Because even within the same era, sleep could look wildly different depending on status. But the basic principles of warmth, adaptation, and survival still applied. The rich child's bedtime now that we've wandered through the chaos of peasant homes, animals, and crowded inns, let's peek into the world of noble children, where sleep was still challenging, but in a completely different, sometimes ridiculous, way. While they didn't have to share their beds with pigs or chickens, the rich had their own quirks, comforts, and bedtime dramas that are worth exploring. First, the beds. Noble children slept on large wooden frames, often topped with multiple layers of feather mattresses, soft blankets, and even silk sheets if their family was wealthy enough. These beds were a far cry from the lumpy straw pallets of peasants. Yet, despite the apparent luxury, they still had to contend with drafty stone walls, high ceilings, and minimal heat. Even a feather mattress doesn't fully compensate for a cold winter night in a castle. Comfort was relative. Even the rich shivered sometimes. Curtains were another feature unique to noble bedrooms. Heavy drapes could be pulled around the bed to trap heat and provide privacy. They also served as a sort of barrier against stray drafts, insects, or the occasional mouse. Picture a child cocooned in blankets and curtains, surrounded by feather-stuffed luxury, yet still aware of the cold creeping around the stone walls. The struggle for warmth was real, even with soft pillows and fine linens. Wealthy children also had personal attendants or servants. These aides could prepare the bed, lay out extra blankets, and ensure that the nightcap was snug on the child's head. Sometimes they even helped chase away pests because, yes, even feather mattresses and silk sheets could host the occasional flea or louse. And while a servant's presence added comfort, it also added a layer of social expectation. Children had to behave, stay tidy, and adhere to household rules before sleep. Nightcaps were still essential, even in noble homes. Children wore embroidered or finely knitted caps to retain head heat. But here, caps also served as a status symbol. Some were decorated with silk threads or jewels, making bedtime not just functional but stylish because, naturally, appearance mattered even when your bed was a royal fortress. Imagine a 6-year-old with a golden threaded nightcap, trying to curl up in a castle bed while whispering prayers and avoiding the snore of a nearby attendant. It's chaos, but the luxury makes it comical in hindsight. Rich children had more personal space than peasant children, but they were still subject to household rules. They might have been tucked in alone, but the room was likely filled with attendants, candles, and ceremonial objects. And, of course, the monastic influence often lingered in noble education, prayers before sleep, reflection on moral behavior, and adherence to strict routines were all part of bedtime. Sleep was both comforting and educational. Winter nights in castles were long, fireplaces were large, but heating a massive stone room was inefficient. Noble children might be given hot bricks or small heated stones wrapped in cloth to place under blankets, providing warmth through the night. This was basically the medieval version of a modern heating pad. And while it sounds cozy, managing heated stones could be tricky to close and you could burn too far and you froze. Medieval parents had to balance safety and warmth, a nightly game of trial and error. Even in luxury, noble children weren't immune to fear. Drafty corridors, dark corners, and long nights created opportunities for imagination or terror. A shadow from a flickering candle could become a ghost, a rat could be a demon, and creaking floors could signal an intruder. Parents and attendants offered comfort, but nighttime anxiety was universal. The rich might have fancier beds and warmer rooms, but children still had to navigate fear alongside sleep. Humor plays a role here too. Imagine a noble child lying under silk sheets, fully dressed, wearing an embroidered nightcap, while an attendant fumbles with a heated brick that slips and almost scorches a finger. Or picture a child waking to the sound of the cat, considered a noble pet, pawing their face in search of warmth. Even luxury had its absurdities. Medieval life didn't spare humor even behind thick castle walls. Sleep for noble children also reinforced ritual and routine. Nighttime prayers, blessings, and moral reflection were part of the process. Even when wrapped in fine fabrics and feathered beds, children learned the lessons of vigilance, responsibility, and spiritual mindfulness. Comfort and warmth didn't replace discipline, they enhanced it. Sleep became a blend of physical relief, moral education, and quiet reflection, a combination that shaped noble children just as strongly as peasant children were shaped by survival. Interestingly, luxury didn't remove the need for adaptation. Despite the comforts, noble children still learned strategies for warmth, curling under multiple blankets, staying close to the hearth, and sometimes sleeping in layers of clothing. Even wealth couldn't fully insulate them from the reality of medieval life. Adaptation, resilience, and humor remained essential. In short, the rich child's bedtime was a different flavor of medieval sleep, blending luxury with discipline, warmth with drafty stone rooms, and status with practical survival. Skills. Comfort made life easier, but it didn't eliminate the challenges of a cold, dark, and occasionally chaotic world. Every night was still a lesson in adaptation, observation, and endurance. Next, we'll explore pests, itches, and bedtime struggles, uncovering how fleas, lice, and bedbugs turned every medieval child's sleep into a tiny battle, regardless of wealth or status, because even featherbeds couldn't fully escape the joys of medieval parasitism. Pests, itches, and bedtime struggles all. Right, we've explored cold rooms, lumpy straw, family piles, and even the luxury of noble beds. But there's one universal challenge that spared no medieval child, rich or poor: pests, fleas, lice, bedbugs. Name it, they were a constant, itchy, slightly terrifying part of bedtime. And surviving them was as essential as staying warm or avoiding drafts. Let's start with the basics. Straw mattresses, piles of blankets, and clothing layers were perfect. Hiding spots for tiny creatures. Fleas hopped, lice crawled, and bedbugs nibbled. A medieval child lying on a straw mattress wasn't just trying to stay warm, they were also dodging a miniature army of tiny invaders that could make every night an adventure in scratching and shifting. Modern children, with their spotless sheets and mattresses, can barely imagine the resilience required here. Animals didn't help much. Dogs, pigs, goats, and chickens were warmth providers. Yes, but they also carried fleas, lice, and other pests. Sharing a bed with your pet might keep you cozy, but it also increased the likelihood of a midnight itch attack. Children learned early that warmth came at a price. You might be snuggled up and cozy, but if you stayed still too long, a flea or louse would remind you of your poor life choices. Even noble children weren't immune. Fleas and lice didn't care about silk sheets or feather mattresses. Noble families sometimes employed servants for nitpicking, combing children's hair and bedding to remove pests. But these measures weren't foolproof. The pests were persistent, clever, and remarkably patient. Medieval children became experts at tolerating discomfort, shifting slightly, scratching discreetly, and learning to ignore minor irritations. Humor naturally emerges when we imagine the scenario: a child lying on a feather bed, wearing an embroidered nightcap, trying to sleep while a flea hops across their nose, or a louse crawling along the seam of their sleeve, completely undeterred by silk or wool. It's absurd, but this absurdity was reality. Surviving a night meant managing pests alongside everything else: cold, drafts, sibling, jostling, and animal. Companions, children developed strategies. They learned to curl up tightly, minimizing exposed skin. They might rotate positions in the family pile, hoping the next spot was less infested. Some families sprinkled herbs on the bedding, rosemary, or other aromatic plants believed to repel insects. These small acts of ingenuity provided temporary relief and a sense of control in an otherwise itchy and chaotic world. Interestingly, these nightly struggles had side benefits. Children learned vigilance, patience, and problem-solving skills that applied beyond bedtime. If you could tolerate a flea attack while staying warm and quiet, you were better prepared for the challenges of daytime life, like tending animals, running errands, or navigating the cold outdoors. Bedtime was training disguised as rest. The pests also added a humorous dimension. Medieval children often joked or at least grumbled about their tiny invaders. Imagine whispering to a sibling, "I think the flea is plotting against me," or "that louse has better timing than our mother." Humor became a coping mechanism, a way to endure discomfort without succumbing to frustration. Pest struggles were intensely social as well. In a family pile, one child's scratching might wake another. Animals shifting could bring new insects into a warm zone. Medieval children quickly learned the rules of shared discomfort. Tolerate, adapt, and find creative ways to stay comfortable without disturbing others. Survival required coordination, negotiation, and patience learned before the age of 10. Even small rituals helped. Children might shake out blankets, pat down straw, or use their clothing layers as temporary shields. In noble households, servants combed hair or inspected bedding. In peasant homes, ingenuity and persistence were key. These strategies were passed down from older siblings or parents, forming a collective knowledge of bedtime survival, humor, and resilience, combined beautifully here. Despite fleas, lice, and bedbugs, children learned to laugh at the absurdities. The combination of warmth, family, animals, and pests created a unique ecosystem of survival. Every scratch, every nudge, every flinch became part of the nighttime adventurer. Skill building, memory making, slightly itchy adventure. Ultimately, pests remind us that medieval sleep was never simple or predictable. It was an ongoing negotiation with the environment, animals, siblings, and even tiny insects. Children developed endurance, humor, creativity, and social skills, all while trying to get a few hours of rest on a lumpy mattress. Modern complaints about bedbugs or mosquitoes are just a faint echo of the nightly challenges medieval children faced routinely. Next, we'll explore sleeping upright or in armor, a peculiar and fascinating aspect of medieval sleep practices. Yes, some children slept sitting up or even partially clothed in armor because survival, comfort, and superstition often collided in the most unexpected ways. Sleeping upright or in armor just when you thought medieval bedtime couldn't get any stranger. Let's talk about a practice that might make modern children and parents scratch their heads. Sleeping upright or even partially in armor. Yes, you read that right. While most children curled up on straw mattresses or shared beds with siblings and animals, some slept sitting up, and in certain situations, noble or warrior children even slept with bits of armor on. Let's start with the upright sleep. In some regions, people believed that lying flat was unhealthy or spiritually risky. Propping oneself upright or partially upright was thought to prevent bodily harm, aid digestion, and protect against certain diseases. Think of it as an early form of the modern recliner, but without cushions, electronics, or Netflix. Children adapted to this arrangement by leaning against walls, stacked straw, or wooden supports. Not exactly cozy, but it worked. Imagine a child curled on a pile of straw with a slightly angled back, attempting to find a comfortable position. They are fully clothed, wearing a nightcap, and possibly sharing space with siblings or small animals. The upright posture reduced drafts on the torso and allowed quick reaction if the fire needed tending or a goat decided to move. Medieval sleep wasn't just rested, was preparedness in action. Armor. Sleep, on the other hand, was less common, but fascinating. Young nobles or children of warrior families might wear light pieces of armor or chainmail at night, particularly during times of unrest or travel. This wasn't about comfort, it was about protection, even in the rarefied hours of sleep. A child in armor was ready for an unexpected threat, whether it was a rival knight, a thief, or an unruly pig. Yes, pigs could be terrifying in small spaces. This might sound extreme, but it highlights a key medieval principle. Sleep was never completely separate from survival. Comfort was a bonus. Preparedness was essential. Children learned to sleep lightly, remain aware, and adapt to unusual circumstances. Sleeping upright or in armor trained the body for alertness, endurance, and resilience, skills that would be invaluable in adulthood. Humor, of course, finds its way into the absurdity. Picture a 6-year-old in chainmail, struggling to curl up, sharing a pile with siblings and a small dog. The nightcap slips under a metal shoulder plate, the child shifts, a goat nudges the pile, and somehow, amidst this chaos, sleep is achieved. It's ridiculous, uncomfortable, but strangely effective. Medieval children were masters of adaptation and improvisation. Sleeping upright also had practical benefits beyond superstition. It allowed better breathing in case of illness, helped monitor sleeping siblings or animals, and enabled quick response to household fires or emergencies. In a world without central heating, alarms, or modern healthcare, being partially awake while technically asleep was a survival strategy. Armor added another layer literally. Chainmail or light protective gear kept children warm and ready for action, but it was heavy and restrictive, requiring skill to balance rest with readiness. Some children might only wear parts of the armor, like a breastplate or greaves, leaving enough freedom to curl, stretch, or adjust for warmth. This hybrid form of sleep is a reminder that medieval life demanded constant ingenuity in the middle of the night. Interestingly, these practices were socially reinforced. Parents and teachers instructed children on upright sleeping postures or protective armor usage. Observing and learning these routines became part of childhood education. Nobles' children were trained for the realities of adult life, blending comfort, safety, and readiness in every nighttime habit. Humor, resilience, and practicality combined here beautifully. Modern children might complain about stiff mattresses, blankets, or bedtime routines, but medieval children slept in ways we would call absurd, mastered techniques for warmth and alertness, and somehow managed to thrive. The upright posture and occasional armor weren't failures, they were clever adaptations to the challenges of cold, drafts, fear, and uncertainty. Finally, sleeping upright or in armor reminds us that medieval sleep was multi-layered, physical, mental, and social. Children had to navigate discomfort, fear, pests, and family dynamics while remaining alert, adaptive, and occasionally stylish. Hello. Embroidered nightcap under chainmail. Sleep was survival, education, and adventure all rolled into one. Next, we'll explore winter survival hacks, uncovering the clever ways medieval children and families stayed warm during the harshest nights. Think hot stones, layered blankets, and tiny miracles of ingenuity. Winter survival hacks. Now that we've explored beds, clothing, animals, upright sleeping, and even armor, it's time to dive into the clever tricks medieval children and families used to survive the bitterest winter nights. The Middle Ages didn't have central heating, insulated homes, or modern blankets. But they weren't helpless, they had inventive, sometimes hilarious ways to stay warm. Let's start with layering. Children wore all the clothes they owned, sometimes multiple tunics, leggings, socks, and nightcaps, essentially creating a human insulation system. Parents were strategic, making sure the youngest or weakest children were tucked into the warmest spots, usually in the middle of the family pile. Think of it as a living, breathing, slightly itchy quilt. Comfort was secondary. Warmth was essential. Another clever hack was the use of heated stones or bricks. Families would warm stones in the hearth, then wrap them in cloth and tuck them into the bed or nestle them near children's feet. The heat radiated slowly, creating a primitive, but surprisingly effective, hot water bottle. Of course, too close and you risked singed toes, or worse, so careful placement was key. Children quickly learned the balance between enjoying warmth and avoiding burns, an early lesson in risk management. Animals, as we've mentioned, were also living heaters. Dogs, pigs, and goats were strategically placed near children. Their warmth was both practical and comforting. Children learned which animals were the most predictable sources of heat and adjusted their positions accordingly. For example, a sleeping goat might be excellent warmth at the feet, but problematic near the head, especially if it decided to lick your NIGHTCAP. Families also got creative with bedding arrangements. Straw mattresses could be layered for extra insulation, additional blankets added where available, and cloth could be tucked around the edges of the bed to trap warmth. Noble children had the luxury of thick blankets, curtains, and feather beds. But even peasants developed clever hacks, using whatever fabric or straw was available to create small pockets of warmth. Some households went a step further with microfire strategies. Small hearths or braziers were used to warm individual sleeping areas. Fires were maintained carefully throughout the night, with older children sometimes assigned to keep the flame alive. This was a responsibility, but also a survival skill. If the fire went out, the cold could be dangerous, so children learned vigilance and patience along with their bedtime routines. Herbs were another interesting tactic. Certain fragrant herbs, like rosemary or lavender, were tucked into bedding or straw. These herbs weren't just for smell, they were believed to repel pests, but they also added a touch of comfort to an otherwise harsh sleeping environment. A child drifting off amid the aroma of rosemary could ignore the occasional flea or louse. At least momentarily, in some cases, families practiced strategic body positioning. Young children were tucked near adults for maximum warmth, while older children might huddle together or near animals. Siblings often rotated positions through the night to share the heat evenly, making sure everyone survived until morning. This required negotiation, observation, and sometimes gentle nudging, but it worked. Even simple daytime preparation affected winter nights. Children who were well fed, clothed, and physically active during the day had a better chance of generating and retaining body heat at night. Parents encouraged movement before bedtime to ensure warmth, knowing that a sleepy but slightly warmed child would be easier to settle on a lumpy mattress, and humor, of course, was never far away. Picture a child buried under 5 layers of clothing, next to a snoring sibling, a restless goat, and a hot stone that keeps slipping toward the edge of the mattress. It's chaotic, uncomfortable, and somehow works. Medieval children adapted quickly, learning patience, flexibility, and ingenuity, all essential skills for survival. Finally, these winter survival hacks weren't just about warmth. They were about resilience, family cooperation, and problem solving. Children learned that survival required planning, observation, and clever use of resources. Every night was a miniature test of skill, endurance, and creativity. By the time they reached adulthood, they had mastered the art of winter sleep in ways modern humans with central heating can hardly imagine so. Warmth in the Middle Ages wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity met with ingenuity. Layered clothing, heated stones, strategic bedding, animals, and herbal tricks combined into a surprisingly effective system. And medieval children, armed with humor and adaptability, managed to thrive in conditions that might seem impossible to us today. Next, we'll explore what kept children awake from the practical like noise and cold to the mysterious like fear and superstition. These factors added an extra layer of challenge to medieval sleep and shaped the way children learnt to rest. What kept them awake? We've covered cold, lumpy mattresses, family piles, animals, rituals, and clever survival hacks. But even with all that preparation, medieval children didn't always sleep peacefully. There were countless things that could keep them awake, from practical annoyances to supernatural fears. And much like today, not all of it had to do with temperature or bedding. First, the obvious, noise. Medieval homes and inns weren't quiet. Fires crackled, doors creaked, animals shuffled, and people whispered or argued throughout the night. Even a snoring sibling could disrupt a child's sleep. The family dog might start barking at shadows, a goat could bleat, or a chicken might roost on the edge of the bed, pecking at fingers or blankets. Add in the occasional wind rattling a window or a storm thrashing against the roof, and it's clear why children often slept lightly, waking at the slightest sound. Animals weren't the only disturbance. Children sometimes had bodily discomfort. Itchy clothing, scratchy blankets, fleas, lice, or simply the stiffness from lying on straw or wooden planks. Layered clothing, while essential for warmth, could restrict movement, making it hard to get comfortable. And if you shared a bed with multiple siblings, negotiating personal space and warmth became an ongoing midnight challenge. Then there were the practical worries. Children, especially older ones, might wake thinking about chores, livestock, or other duties awaiting them in the morning. In some households, children were expected to keep an eye on the fire, tend animals, or watch for thieves or wolves. Middle of the night wakefulness wasn't unusual, it was a natural part of life. Modern kids worrying about tomorrow's math test. Consider medieval children calculating whether the pig needed feeding at 3 a.m. Fear played a huge role too. Darkness itself was terrifying, filled with shadows, mysterious sounds, and the ever-present thought of spirits, demons, or wandering souls. Stories told by parents and clergy reinforced the idea that nighttime was risky. Even noble children, snug in feather beds, were aware of drafty corridors, strange noises, and the possibility of danger lurking nearby. Fear was not irrational, it was a survival tool. Stay alert, stay safe, and survive the night. Dreams and nightmares contributed as well. Remember our discussion of vivid, morally charged, or ominous dreams. A bad dream could wake a child in terror, leaving them alert and anxious for the remainder of the night. Parents often reassured children through prayers, rituals, or simply presence, but the impact of a vivid dream lingered, sometimes shaping a child's mood until morning. Interestingly, social dynamics could keep children awake. Siblings moved, whispered, or squabbled, disrupting even the warmest pile. Animals shifted positions or made noise. In inns or communal settings, strangers added unpredictability. Snoring merchants, restless travelers, or the occasional clumsy footstep. Children learned early to adapt to noise and unpredictability, honing alertness and patience that would serve them throughout life. Humor again sneaks in here. Picture a child trying to sneak back under a blanket, dodging a shifting sibling, avoiding the nose of a snoring dog, and whispering prayers while imagining a spectral goat. Chaos, discomfort, fear, and imagination intertwined, making sleep an adventure rather than a simple necessity. Medieval children learned to navigate discomfort with creativity and resilience, skills modern humans often take for granted. In short, what kept children awake wasn't just cold or hunger. It was a combination of noise, physical discomfort, fear, social dynamics, and supernatural belief. Sleep was never guaranteed, was earned, adapted to, and managed creatively. Children developed strategies, patience, and humor, learning to cope with challenges while still finding a way to rest, even intermittently. Despite these obstacles, medieval children survived. They learned to adapt to their environment, negotiate their place in family piles, navigate fear, and use ingenuity to manage both the practical and the imaginary challenges of the night. And that, in itself, is remarkable. Sleep in the Middle Ages was education, survival, and adventure rolled into one. Next, we'll reflect on lessons and comparisons to modern sleep, seeing how these medieval practices still resonate and how they shaped human adaptability over centuries. We've traveled through the cold rooms, lumpy mattresses, animal bedmates, upright sleeping, armor, pests, nightmares, and inns of medieval life. By now, it's clear that sleep in the Middle Ages was far from simply it. There's a lot we can learn from it, even today. First, let's talk about resilience. Medieval children had to endure cold, noise, pests, and sometimes terrifying darkness. Modern children complain if their blanket isn't warm enough or if the Wi-Fi drops during a late-night scroll. By contrast, medieval children developed endurance and adaptability from an early age. They learned to tolerate discomfort, stay alert, and navigate chaos, all skills that are still valuable today, even if our challenges have shifted from frostbitten toes to buffering videos. Second, there's the lesson of community and warmth. Family piles, shared beds, and even animals weren't just about survival. They fostered social bonds and cooperation. Children learned to negotiate space, share warmth, and tolerate one another's quirks. Modern children sleep alone, in quiet, climate-controlled rooms, which is comfortable, yes, but it also deprives them of those nightly lessons in empathy and cooperation that medieval children mastered naturally. Third, adaptability to environment was essential. From straw mattresses to lumpy feather beds, upright sleeping, and even armor, children learned to make do with what they had, creating micro-strategies for warmth, comfort, and alertness. Today, we often rely on technology, heating, air conditioning, or soft mattresses to solve every discomfort. Medieval children remind us that creativity and problem-solving can go a long way in ensuring comfort and survival. Let's not forget rituals and mindfulness. Bedtime prayers, segmented sleep, and night watches all served to structure life, reduce anxiety, and provide a sense of safety. Modern routines, lullabies, white noise machines, or bedtime stories serve a similar function, but medieval children did this without music, apps, nightlights, or glow-in-the-dark stars. They learned to manage fear, organize their environment, and prepare their minds for rest, all while navigating a cold and sometimes chaotic world. Humor, too, was a crucial tool. From dodging animals in the family pile to enduring itchy clothing, fleas, and nightcaps, medieval children found ways to laugh at their circumstances, building emotional resilience alongside physical endurance. Modern sleep challenges rarely require this kind of ingenuity or perspective. Our struggles are cushioned, literally and figuratively. Another fascinating lesson is the value of segmented sleep. Waking in the middle of the night for reflection, chores, or prayer wasn't inefficient. It was biologically attuned and culturally significant. It gave children a sense of agency and responsibility something most of us rarely experience today. Perhaps our habit of sleeping straight through the night is convenient, but it might also have dulled our natural adaptability and responsiveness to subtle environmental cues. Finally, there's the perspective on luxury and comfort. Medieval. Children, whether peasant or noble, endured conditions we would find unimaginable. Yet they survived, adapted, and even thrived. Today, we complain about minor inconveniences, a slightly stiff mattress, a noisy neighbor, or a chilly room. Comparing our experience to theirs reminds us to appreciate warmth, shelter, and the small comforts that we often take for granted. Humor, perspective, and resilience are all central lessons from medieval sleep. Children faced the cold, the dark, pests, fear, and discomfort, but they also learned patience, ingenuity, and cooperation. In a way, medieval sleep was a training ground for life itself. It shaped not only how they rested, but how they interacted with others, adapted to their environment, and approached challenges. So the next time you wake up at 2 a.m. because your cat decided your face was a pillow, or because your heater isn't working perfectly, take a moment to consider the medieval child huddled in a straw mattress with siblings, a goat and a chicken, dodging pests, reciting prayers, and enduring freezing drafts. You're warm, safe, and comfortable by comparison. And maybe, just maybe, you'll sleep a little easier tonight, appreciating how much humans can endure and how clever we can be when survival is on the line. And that, dear reader, concludes our journey through medieval children's sleep, from straw mattresses to nightcaps, from family piles to inadventures, from dreams and rituals to resilience and humor. We've seen how children navigated the night in ways that were challenging, fascinating, and often hilarious. Sleep, after all, has always been an adventure, whether in the Middle Ages or today. Wrapping up medieval sleep, and so, dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through medieval children's sleep. What began as a simple question, how did kids survive freezing nights without modern comforts, has blossomed into a tour of warmth, chaos, humor, and ingenuity. From lumpy straw mattresses to nightcaps, from goats and pigs to segmented sleep, from dreams and fears to rituals and moral lessons, we've seen that medieval sleep was anything but simple. It's amazing to think about how children adapted. They learned resilience, creativity, and social cooperation long before they reached adulthood. They navigated drafts, pests, and crowded beds, balanced fear and imagination, and even incorporated humor into their nightly struggles. Modern humans, with our heated rooms, memory foam mattresses, and central heating, rarely experience sleep as an exercise in problem-solving and endurance. Yet medieval children did it every night, and often with a smile or a sigh, depending on whether a goat had stolen the warmest spot. We've also seen the diversity of experiences. Noble children enjoyed feather beds, embroidered linens, and attendants to tend to nightcaps. Yet they still faced drafty stone walls, long winters, and nighttime fears. Peasant children slept in straw, shared beds with siblings and animals, and battled fleas and lice. Yet they mastered adaptation and survival. Travel nights at inns, monasteries, and roadsides added new layers of challenge, teaching responsibility, alertness, and patience. The spectrum of sleep shows us that comfort is relative, but resilience is universal. The lessons from medieval sleep extend far beyond history. They remind us to appreciate warmth, comfort, and safety. They show the value of routine, rituals, and mindfulness, They highlight the importance of humor, creativity, and cooperation in the smallest, most uncomfortable moments. And perhaps most importantly, they demonstrate that humans are remarkably adaptable. When faced with cold, darkness, and chaos, children can learn, survive, and even thrive. Next time you complain about a drafty room, a slightly stiff mattress, or a noisy sibling, just imagine a 6-year-old in the Middle Ages, fully clothed, lying on a lumpy straw mattress, wedged between siblings, a goat and a chicken, dodging fleas, performing bedtime prayers, and perhaps trying not to wake a snoring dog. And somehow, despite all odds, they slept. And then they woke, ready to face the next day. It's humbling, hilarious, and inspiring all at once. So, whether you're lying in your memory foam mattress, wrapped in blankets, sipping a warm drink, or just scrolling through your phone, remember the medieval child. Remember their ingenuity, resilience, and humor. And maybe, just maybe, take a moment to be grateful for warmth, safety, and uninterrupted sleep. Because sleep has always been more than rest, it's survival, adaptation, learning, and sometimes a little adventure. Thank you for joining me on this journey through sleepy history. I hope you've laughed, learned, and maybe even shivered a little along the way. Now, as you settle down, dim the lights and pull up your modern blanket. Take comfort in knowing that human ingenuity and resilience in the face of a cold night are timeless. Sleep well, dream well, and remember the medieval children who mastered the art of enduring the night, one lumpy, itchy, occasionally chaotic, and always fascinating evening at a time. Good night, and may your dreams be warm, peaceful, and free of goats.